All right, cool. So I'll start the event now. Thank you everyone for joining today, the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator Kickoff event. So my name is Kun Peng. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in management science engineering at Stanford University. I'm also vice president of Stanford Blockchain Club and also founding director of the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator program. So the reason why I started this program is because although there are a lot of Stanford startup classes and programs, but none of them is crypto focused. So having experience in both traditional and crypto startups, so I understand there's a huge difference, right? So why not create a cohort of crypto native and people who truly understand the Web3 technologies in the Stanford ecosystem. So most of the startups we admitted to for this quarter are at a relatively young age or early stage, having some interesting insights and trying to validate their hypotheses or building some MVPs. So they're in different verticals, ranging from DAO tooling and also a lot of in the DeFi space, some in the Web3 infra, some doing NFTs, and also have some GameFi as well. And we have some of the best resources and connections to try to help these startups, incubate them. So on the legal side, we have Cooley and some other top law firms. And if they're interested in fundraising, we have like the connection to the Bex VC, a16z for sure, and Paradigm, and also many other VCs. And for tokenomics, we have from Gauntlet and also some millions from RV. And then we'll have also a lot of VCs and experienced crypto founders willing to advise and contribute on some other aspects like need funding, hypothesis validation, or business development, marketing. We also this quarter do a lot of lectures and seminars and workshops. For instance, the one that excites me the most and looking forward to is Dan Robinson doing a lecture on Uniswap v3 and how Uniswap v3 works, right? All that being said, we have a great program and great events planned for this quarter. So I'm really excited now today to have Ali and Dan join us to kick off the accelerator today. So I will just pass on to Dan Boneh.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks, Kun. Thanks for running this. I'm really excited about the accelerator program. I guess it's been running, it's going to be running all year. It started, I guess, in the fall. This is the second quarter, and it's going to be running in the spring as well. It's a really fantastic program. So I'm really happy to see all of you here. I think you'll get a lot of value out of the accelerator program. As you know, we also have a lot of blockchain courses on campus. So I hope to see you in many of our courses. And basically every quarter to start the program, we want to start it kind of with a bang. So we kind of invite a luminary in the space. And today I'm really, really happy to have Ali Yahya join us. Ali's a general partner at a16z. Just so you realize, the a16z crypto fund is a fair number of people, and Ali is actually sort of one of a very small number of general partners. So it's really wonderful to have you, Ali. And Ali's been in the space for a very long time, knows the space extremely well, kind of has a very, very broad view of everything that's happening. And Ali, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And also, I wanted to say, like, I'm also formerly a Stanford student, took a bunch of classes both in the MS&E department and the computer science department. So it's great to be talking to you guys.
Oh yeah, I should have said that. Of course, Ali is a Stanford alum. How could I ignore that?
That's all good.
Yeah, fantastic. So really, actually, welcome back. So, I guess I wanted to start with sort of a high-level question. Ali, maybe you can tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into the space, and more importantly, kind of what's the thing that excites you the most about blockchain applications now?
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit of background about me. Like I was born and raised in Mexico City and kind of got into computers early on. I was kind of exposed firsthand to some of the limitations of government and of money back in Mexico City, because it is a third world country, and there's like less trust in institutions that you might be able to have in a place like the US. And so that was kind of like somewhere in the back of my mind throughout childhood. I wanted to come to the US because this is where it felt like all of the innovation that was really happening in the world was at. So came to Stanford, studied computer science, took all of Dan's classes, some of the best classes at the university. Highly recommend the cryptography class, but also the kind of the blockchain and cryptocurrency class, which I think is also probably the best kind of take for the space from a technical perspective, if you want to go deeper. And then this was like back in I was class of 2010. In 2010, I was doing research with Professor David Mezieres, also in the computer science department. And that's when I first got exposed to the Bitcoin white paper. Probably too early to actually discover the Bitcoin white paper because it was very much a toy. It felt very much like a toy back then, and it was hard to take it seriously. And it was easy to miss the implications, which is what happened to me. And so even though I mined it in the computer cluster, I did not keep track of any of the private keys. And so you live and learn. And then I went on to I worked at Google for a while. I did like distributed systems for machine learning. I'm not a citizen of the country, so I had to have a real job. And there wasn't really any real job in crypto, but I was fascinated by it throughout. And until this happened, like I was at Google for a couple of years, Google X, the Google Brain. And then finally I got kind of reconnected into the space by meeting Chris here at the firm. And that's kind of how I got into the space. Chris was like, you should join, we should start a crypto fund, and then the rest is history. So I was the first kind of dedicated crypto person at Andreessen Horowitz. And I think like the most exciting thing about the space to me is the fact that it's this general purpose technology for coordination at a larger scale than really has ever been possible before. And like one good place to start might be what I think is the biggest misconception in the space, which is that blockchains are databases or ledgers or data structures. People tend to think of blockchains in these terms, but actually the best way to think of a blockchain is as a computer. And it's a computer that has very different properties than any other kind of computer. And that is that it's collectively owned by a community, and it's able to run a particular kind of program that no other kind of computer can run. And that is a program that is in a sense self-sovereign. It kind of has a life of its own. It runs itself, and it's free of interference from anyone, even the people who originally wrote it, and also the people who control the physical machines that actually execute their logic. So in a sense, these are programs that are sovereign and kind of have a life of their own, that are tamper-proof by really anyone. And I think what's powerful about that is that it actually kind of inverts the power relationship between software and hardware, in that usually, traditionally, hardware has power over software because whomever controls the physical hardware can change the software or can turn it off, right? Has complete control over what the software does. And this applies to whether it's like your laptop or whether it's like a machine in the cloud. The person who owns the machine in the cloud has power over the software. Whereas on a blockchain, it's actually the reverse. The software has power over the hardware. The hardware becomes a commodity. Miners just come to this kind of open permissionless marketplace to provide computation, but they don't have power over what the software does, because the software is part of a network, and the network enforces certain rules and makes sure that the programs on this computer run in such a way that respects those rules. And so that's like the best way to think of a blockchain. And then the key question is, what kinds of applications can you now build all of a sudden, given that we now have this new kind of computer? And I think what's interesting to think about is just like, if you look at the progression of computing up, right? Like we went from a mainframe computers to mini computers to personal computers to mobile phones and cloud to now what I would argue is a new paradigm, blockchain computers. And every single paradigm has unlocked new kinds of applications that were impossible in the previous paradigm. And what's important is that at every stage, it was very easy to kind of say, well, this computer is just a worse computer, right? In the case of mobile phones, for example, it was easy to say a mobile phone is just a worse personal computer. I mean, it's slower, it has limited battery, the screen is smaller, it doesn't have a keyboard. But the thing that I think people might miss at the beginning is that a mobile phone, obviously, and now we know in retrospect, has all of these other capabilities. Just the fact that it's portable, the fact that it's bundled with GPS and with a camera and with all of these other like features that a personal computer didn't have is what unlocked a whole new kind of a wave of new interesting applications. And now kind of like the whole mobile revolution is like well underway. And so the same thing applies for blockchains. Blockchains as computers are very slow computers. They're very expensive computers. They're very expensive in every sense of the word, for computation, for storage. But they do have this new capability, this ability to run these kinds of programs that can make commitments that people can actually trust. And so then what is the wave of applications that will come from that? And I think, I mean, one thing we've already begun to see is that the kinds of applications that shine on a blockchain are the kinds of applications that really rely and depend on trust. So money is a great example, right? Like Bitcoin as the first example is a kind of a form of money that makes a commitment. It's a program that makes a commitment that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin tokens. And that commitment is credible enough that Bitcoin is now at this kind of like universal store of value and is a contender eventually, potentially, for being kind of like gold. And the fact that the software can make that commitment is something that's uniquely enabled by kind of the underlying blockchain computer, the Bitcoin blockchain. But there may be many other kinds of applications that leverage that same feature. You can extend the financial kind of set of applications, and that's how you end up with DeFi, with decentralized finance. And so there are protocols that are not just a store of value, but also allow you to take loans and allow you to like maybe build something that looks more like a stable form of currency, like a stable coin that's kind of fully algorithmic and fully trustless. And so like kind of the money kind of set of applications is interesting because those depend strongly on trust. And then beyond that, there may be other kinds of applications that have nothing to do with money. And that's kind of like what I think is what more recently has started to emerge are applications that lean into these new capabilities that blockchains offer, but maybe are like more analogous to say like some of the Web 2 services. So for example, you could build using a blockchain something like a social network, but where the social graph itself is more of a public good. It's a protocol, it's open source, users own their own data, they own their node in the graph, in the social graph, they own the connections from that node to other nodes, and that they can decide who to follow or who to be friends with fully, and they can take their identity with them. And there's no multi-trillion-dollar monopoly in the center that controls the social network, that kind of dictates who gets to participate and who doesn't. It has this power of deplatforming people. It's just like a whole other kind of whole other set of applications that also have to do with trust, but are not necessarily about money. And that's another example of something that's interesting, that's more recently emerging. And there are many other kind of categories, but I'll stop there. I think that maybe is like a good initial take, and we'll kind of keep diving in.
Yeah, I like to say that there are kind of four application areas so far that have been very successful for blockchains. You know, finance, of course, but then also NFTs and DAOs and games. Maybe we'll talk about DAOs and games in just a minute. Maybe actually before we go any further, maybe you can just say a few words about why now. Like, why is it that blockchains develop now and not like 20 years from now or 20 years in the past? Like, what is so special about the last decade that saw their development?
That's a great question. And I'm actually also super curious what you think, Dan. I mean, I think that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of innovation only happens, once every so long, once a century. I don't know. It's like a fundamental enough innovation that it does, like, I think it does kind of change the game in a significant way. Maybe the reason that it happened when it did is as kind of alluded to in the Genesis block, right? Like kind of the bailouts of the banks after the financial crisis. Like it kind of culminated at a moment that kind of was very, very apropos, just given what was going on in the world. And that may have been the inspiration for a lot of the thinking and a lot of the work that went into Bitcoin. Since then, I mean, I think that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitcoin whitepaper as a key innovation was really striking. And that kind of the emergence of the Bitco yeah, we have had this like nice 10-year run, more than 10-year run since the Bitcoin white paper was written. But I think of it as like there have been multiple stages to crypto, and we started with and it's like concentric circles. Like the innermost concentric circle is the Bitcoin circle, with like the cypherpunk, crypto anarchic, libertarian kind of Austrian economist like philosophical bent. And then it expands, and it includes like the next concentric circle, which are the people who came into the space with Ethereum. Ethereum being a more tech forward kind of idea, where it's less about the cypherpunk, crypto anarchic, libertarian political kind of movement, and it's more about enabling a new kind of technology, enabling a new paradigm of computation. And that brought a whole new set of people into the space, like people who were more sort of more computer science focused, more kind of like protocol engineers, distributed systems engineers, people who like to think about incentives. And I think that then led to I think like the DeFi wave, which brought people who I think were like aware and smart about the computer science, but also had this kind of financial angle to them. And that was a kind of a whole other group. And then more recently, we've had like this NFT wave, which has brought into the space artists, right, and like photographers and people like musicians, people who are creative. And it's kind of cool to see actually like the mixture of the space with each successive concentric circle becomes ever more diverse, and I think more powerful, because now we have more ideas, we have more perspectives in the space. And I think like it all kind of culminates, like I do feel like right now, actually, like to the question of why now, that right now we are at this like unique inflection point, because it has felt like I kind of have been now full-time in the space for 5 years, and it has felt for most of that time like we were really just building infrastructure in a vacuum, right? We were building like the building blocks, like the protocols, the kind of the sort of the very fundamental, like the substrate on top of which something could eventually be theoretically built. And like in 2018 and 2019, like in the depth of the crypto winter, we could only speculate about what all of these kind of infrastructural pieces would be eventually used for. And I think now, like we're starting to see the actual flywheel spin. And there's this flywheel that always happens in computing, which is that you have the infrastructure, you have a computer, and then developers build applications for that computer. And if that application gets a lot of traction, then that begins to stress test the computer. And there's more demand now for what the computer does, because this application is driving usage. So it forces the computer to get better. And once the computer gets better, now other developers can build better applications. And that creates this like virtuous flywheel that makes computers just get better very quickly. But you have to close the loop, right? And I think for the longest time, we hadn't closed the loop with blockchains. And now finally, there are now applications, I think in part because of NFTs and because of gaming and some of the DeFi applications that really do have the level of traction to kind of stress the underlying infrastructure and create enough of an incentive for everything to improve at a faster rate. So it does feel to me like we're excited, because it feels like this is an inflection point where we're finally getting to the point at which a lot of the pieces click together and it all begins to work, and real applications that have real world value begin to be built. And that I think just like is like a self-fulfilling kind of self-reinforcing feedback loop.
I can add to that like on my end, like I used to see a lot of skeptics on blockchains. You know, it's all just a fad, it's all temporary, it's all going to go away. And it's really interesting to see literally this year, like there's like as you say, an inflection point where the skeptics are kind of switching over and saying, maybe this is something, maybe there's something here, maybe I should learn something about this. And you know that I kind of love the technology behind blockchains. I'm kind of all the noise in the press to me is just a distraction. There really is a huge collection of beautiful ideas, technical ideas in the blockchain space that I hope all of you will kind of get into and learn more about. So continuing with the high level, I just want to stay for a few more minutes at the high level, and then I want to dive kind of deeper. So, you know, our students on campus, like let's say you're an engineering student or a business school student or whatever, wherever you are on campus, you know, there are many amazing opportunities on campus. Like you can go into machine learning, you can go into all sorts of other types of of businesses, or you can go into blockchains. So can you help basically, what would you suggest? What would, students can only, at some point they have to pick what they're going to work on. So how would you compare kind of going into the blockchain space versus going into machine learning or any of the other buzzwords that are kind of running around campus?
Definitely, that's a great question. I'm obviously biased, but I will give you an answer. And I think I actually can give you a good answer because I was in machine learning previously. And I spent like 4 years at Google, did a bunch of machine learning stuff. Machine learning, I think, is an incredible technology, and I think will change a lot of sort of problem areas. Like it will solve a lot of important problems in the world. But this was my journey, and I think like maybe we can generalize it a little bit, or you can take from it what you will. I think like machine learning, I feel like is at the, like you know how technology advances in this like sigmoidal patterns where you have like some key breakthrough, and then that leads to an explosion of like new ideas and innovation and ways of kind of like leveraging that breakthrough to do new things. And I feel like that breakthrough from machine learning happened in 2012-ish when like ReLUs began to be used, like with AlexNet, for like new neural networks that actually now scale and actually have the performance that you would expect from them, or that you would want from them to be able to do useful things. And then since then, I think we have seen this explosion of interesting applications for machine learning. And I think that breakthrough was fundamental, but it doesn't feel to me like it's the be all end all for artificial intelligence. Like I think like there are breakthroughs that remain in the future before we get to general purpose, like strong AI. And so now I feel like we're at the tail end of this S-curve, of the sigmoid kind of pattern from that breakthrough. And we were like, I think we're reaching a plateau where like a lot of it feels incremental at this point. And then also, I think because of all of the excitement in machine learning, it's an incredibly crowded field. And I felt this because I have studied mostly distributed systems and like systems in school. And then when I joined Google, I decided I wanted to like learn all about machine learning. And it was hard. It was hard to get from where I was to the frontier, right? Like there's like decades of work that people have done, like thousands, if not tens of thousands of research papers that are interesting and maybe worth reading or worth knowing about. And so it's just like hard to get to the frontier and to begin to actually contribute and to add to the body of knowledge that's been built. And so that's kind of machine learning. And I feel like I'm kind of like, I feel like like we've kind of plateaued a little bit, and maybe there will be another breakthrough that leads to another wave of innovation, but who knows when that will happen. It's kind of unpredictable. Whereas sort of crypto feels like this, especially it feels like it's still very early, even though it's been 10 years. Really, it's actually just been like 5 years since Ethereum became a thing, because that's when a lot of the new ideas really began to enter the space. And a lot of the infrastructure has really only been built in the last few years. It's only really become possible to do interesting things in the last maybe year or two, right? And so it's a very new space. It's actually shockingly easy to get to the frontier. Like I think if anyone here decides to spend, if you haven't already, if you decide to spend 6 months with very dedicated effort to kind of read about the space and learn about it with an open mind, like you can actually understand most of what the space is about, right? And how blockchains work, what the cutting edge is, what the open problems are. And there aren't that many people in the space, right? It's still a very small space. There's actually just a developer report recently that showed like there's like the number of very active developers in the space is in the low tens of thousands. It's kind of shocking. And so that means that there's an enormous opportunity. Because if you believe, as we do, that this technology is truly transformative and revolutionary, and will kind of touch all areas of kind of human activity, there's enormous growth ahead. And there's just so much low-hanging fruit because there's all these like open problems that need to be solved. And there aren't that many people who are solving them. And so I think entering the space just positions you really, really well to go forth and create a lot of value and learn a lot of things and be in a great position for sort of a great trajectory and a great career.
So just to reinforce your point here, even if you look at our blockchain class, which is kind of goes from zero to to blockchain, just in that class, which is kind of starts at the beginning, most of the reading material is from the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
You're reading really current papers. You're not like reading things from the 19th century.
Well, then just the fact that you kind of have to re-architect your entire class every year just suggests like the space is changing so quickly that you actually have to like redo the course because everything is different every time.
Right. It's very, very fast moving. And the point is, I think anyone on this call can have quite a strong impact on the space by contributing and working in the area. So I think that's a really good point, Ali. So let's see. So the last high-level question I'll ask is, a lot of the students in the call already are working on various blockchain projects. And so some of them are thinking about a blockchain project. Some of them are already further along. So there are lots of variation in the level of students in the call. Could you talk a little bit about what advice would you give to students to kind of help evaluate the project that they're thinking of doing or currently working on? And I guess that's related. So, how should they internally evaluate whether the idea that they're working on is sort of the right thing to do? And maybe that's also connected to how do you make investment decisions yourself? Like, what do you decide? How do you decide that something is exciting enough that you actually want to dedicate the fund to it?
Okay, yeah, great question. So maybe I'll start. So just giving like maybe one framework for thinking about a particular project and whether or not it's compelling and worth pursuing, and then I'll give you a kind of a bit of a breakdown for how we think about our investment strategy. So I actually gave this lecture at this thing that we did that we called Crypto Startup School. It's all online. So you search for a16z Crypto Startup School. Dan actually was a part of it and helped us put it together.
The program.
Dan also gave a lecture, by the way, also very worth checking out. But I gave a lecture on kind of business models and value capture in this space, because there's a bit of a paradox, which is that everything in the space tends to be open source. At least that's the ethos, right? And if you're building a protocol, at least, and there are many different layers at which you can contribute and start a company, but let's focus for now. If you want to build a protocol, and like things that are examples here are layer 1 blockchains, those are protocols, or DeFi protocols that run on layer 1 protocols, those are also protocols. And everything in those categories tend to be open source. And so the paradox is like, how is it that something that is fully open can capture value? Because historically, in like the entirety of the history of business, usually value capture depends on having some kind of secret, right? You keep something secret and to yourself.
Secret sauce is the term, right?
Exactly, so that you can charge for it, right? You can use it to give a service. You can use it. You can maybe like rate limit access to it. And it's a resource that it has to be proprietary, and that's how like money gets made. And it's actually quite hard to find examples of things that capture more value the more open and the more widespread they are, right? So it's a little paradoxical that the more people know about the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain, and the more people copy the code and begin to run it, the more valuable it becomes. So it feels like it kind of turns some of the kind of the traditional wisdom about value capture and business models on its head. And the key, I mean, the reason for that is that this space thrives on network effects, which is basically just this idea that as more participants enter a particular network, the network becomes more valuable. And as it becomes more valuable, it becomes harder to compete against, right? So if you think about Ethereum as a blockchain, the more people run nodes on the Ethereum blockchain, the more secure it becomes. The more people build stuff on top of the Ethereum blockchain, the more valuable it becomes, because now the more kind of utility exists on it, right? And so the more that happens, the harder it is to try to compete against Ethereum. So even though you could copy the code and try to compete on the side, if you fork Ethereum and try to create like a parallel universe that is competing against Ethereum, the reason that it's hard, the reason that it won't automatically work, even though you have the exact same technology, is because the original has network effects. So that's like an important framework. All defensibility in crypto, all defensibility whenever things are open source, comes from network effects. And so when thinking about your idea, there is this distinction that we've made internally, which is that there are things in the space that are libraries, and that is, it's just code that you can then repurpose, you can run, you can just like copy it and use it for whatever you want. And then there are other pieces of code that are networks, right? And so one question is, which is the thing that you're building, is it going to be a library or is it a network? Is there a real network effect around the thing that you're building? Or is the code that you're putting out there just open source code? That's just a library that anyone can use that won't have a network. And so it'll be hard to monetize, right? It'll be hard to build a defensible value capture mechanism around it. And so maybe some examples. So like some of the DeFi protocols, like Uniswap is clearly a network because there is a canonical contract. It's a canonical program that is the Uniswap program that runs on Ethereum that has all of the liquidity of the Uniswap decentralized exchange, right? So the more people provide liquidity to it, the more valuable Uniswap becomes. The more people trade against it, the more valuable it becomes as well, because that means that there are more fees that percolate down to the liquidity providers. And so it's a network, it's a marketplace, and the more participants there are, the more valuable it becomes, which makes it, again, defensible. If you were to fork Uniswap, you won't have all that liquidity. You won't have all those participants. You won't have all the integrations between Uniswap and like wallets and like interfaces that interact with Uniswap. So that has a network effect. On the other hand, I mean, Uniswap was in a sense a generalization or an improvement, an evolution of 0x, which previously was, I mean, it still is. It's another model for a decentralized exchange. But because it's peer-to-peer, like it really is just like a contract that you enter into with someone that you're trading, and it's a one-off thing where like you come together, you decide that you want to trade, you use this contract, you spin it up to effectuate and settle the trade. But then after that, that's it, right? And so it's not as much of a network because each of these two interactions. Each of these interactions doesn't really make other interactions like it better, right? They're kind of isolated and they don't kind of compound in the same way that Uniswap does. And there's a lot of nuance here, and I don't mean to like belittle 0x. I think there's a lot of value there, and there's a lot of really good ideas, and I oversimplify things. But that's a good framework to think about, like what kinds of protocols tend to work and tend to be defensible and grow kind of exponentially versus which ones are less defensible and will probably just be kind of forked, and it's more of a library.
Yeah, so I think that's actually really good advice. But you're kind of saying the stickiness of the protocol, like how easy to move from the protocol that you're building to a competitor's protocol. If that turns out to be difficult, then that's probably a pretty good idea that you're
exactly.
onto. I should add though that at the same time, if you're just entering the space, it's actually a great idea to just go and experiment. Just, it's so easy to write these Solidity contracts and just launch and see what happens. Maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but so what? So you just learned a lot from how your project worked. And so I think there's also, I think the advice that Ali gave is really, really, really good one. But I think there's also room for like just, willy-nilly experiments that maybe they don't go anywhere, but you still learn a lot from them.
Yeah, it's a great point, actually, Dan, because actually for a long time, people believed that Uniswap would not be able to capture value. And it was really just like kind of the drive that Hayden had to build this really cool thing. And he followed his curiosity, which was like kind of exploring, that eventually led to what Uniswap is. But it was very hard to know at the time. And in retrospect, it feels obvious. So that's a great point. I think kind of like exploration is probably the best.
Anyway, this is also a really important point to remember, that if you believe that something is a good idea, you should ignore the naysayers. You can go back to the early days of Ethereum where people were saying this will never be secure, it's too complicated, Ethereum will never work, right? And so if you believe in something, just go do it and don't listen to the naysayers. Yeah, that's always a good idea. Let's see. So I don't want to. I was actually hoping we would have time for a few more in-depth questions. So maybe I'll kind of jump into something a little more technical, and then we'll zoom back up. So there are two issues that I was hoping to address. The first one is basically, I'm very curious about your thoughts of more infrastructure that's needed, right? So, there's a lot of discussions about a lot of smart contracts and DeFi projects that are being built, but what about infrastructure? Like, is there like, there are a lot of infrastructure companies out there already that do things like interoperability, scalability, and so on. Are there other areas of infrastructure in the blockchain space that excites you?
Totally. I love that question, because I feel like infrastructure, given my systems background, is probably the part of the stack that I find most interesting or most kind of exciting. I think that there are a ton of problems, a ton of the kind of interesting work that's being done at the infrastructure level to make all of this work better. And the beauty of it is, again, it's part of this flywheel, right? And like, it's like this back and forth where like new pieces get built, it enables new applications, and it kind of sheds light on what new pieces need to be built. And then more people then get in and start working on those pieces. And so it just kind of builds on itself. I think the obvious key thing that everyone is focused on or has thought about at the infrastructure layer is a scalability problem, is the fact that a blockchain like Ethereum can only really do something like 14 transactions per second. The fact that like the way to think of Ethereum is as a single core, single threaded machine that is shared worldwide for all of its users for all time, right? Which is kind of an unscalable model if you want to actually service billions of users. So you need just better architectures. And fortunately, like kind of the computer science world has like studied ways of scaling systems for a very long time. And there are like ideas around sharding, like basically introducing some amount of parallelism so that it's not the case that there can only really be just one instruction of one transaction running at any point in time. And you can have multiple transactions running at the same time. There are ideas, like I think Solana has an interesting take here as well, where they just have like a different consensus mechanism that elects a leader, and the leader can then move very quickly, sort of kind of process a lot of transactions independently, and then having like a clever solution such that the work that they do can then be kind of verified after the fact by everyone else, but like not kind of forcing every node in the network to do all of the work before you can kind of come to consensus about what the new state is. And so there are kind of many ideas for how to like scale blockchains at the layer 1 level. And there are kind of many different contenders in different approaches for how to do that. There are also other projects that are building a layer above. So this is what's known as layer 2. So people who are building, they're kind of like side chains, or they run kind of alongside a layer 1 blockchain, and they rely on the security of the layer 1 blockchain, but they allow for a smaller set of nodes who maybe have more powerful computers and who have like a kind of a quicker mechanism for arriving at consensus to perform transactions and perform computations more quickly. And there are like maybe 2 variants of layer 2 approaches. One of them is optimistic, in that it is kind of a game theoretical approach that assumes that the work that's being done by the validators on the sidechain is honest, and it's only when someone realizes that actually it wasn't honest that like the layer 1 gets involved, where like you submit a challenge to the work that someone in layer 2 may have done to the layer 1. And I think maybe a good analogy here is like you treat the layer 1 as a Supreme Court in a sense, and you only kind of escalate to it whenever you really need to. And you just kind of assume that the work that's being done is correct. And you kind of move forward with that. And it's only when like something is actually off that you go back and you kind of resolve it. And that's why it's called optimistic. And then there are other approaches that are based on zero knowledge proofs, which use cutting edge cryptography, which Dan is the foremost expert in, to actually create a mathematical proof that the work that was being done on the sidechain is actually correct. And that proof can be efficiently verified by the layer 1. So it's just another way of getting scalability. And there are sort of various trade-offs. So scalability is a big question, and I don't know if any of that maybe it was too kind of abstract.
No, it's good. It's good. I think it's good. So scalability is one big infrastructure piece that's needed. And by the way, I have to say, after 30 years of zero knowledge proofs being viewed as this very theoretical object, all of a sudden, like the whole world is now talking about zero knowledge proofs. I feel like I'm living in a dream. For me, this is amazing to see. So and also the success of these zero knowledge proofs in scaling up the blockchains has been kind of remarkable. Ali, I do want to add one thing in the infrastructure space. I'm personally very excited about the interoperability question between blockchain. I kind of view the world that we live in today as sort of the pre-internet era, where different network providers basically would provide their own siloed system, and you couldn't really talk. You couldn't really, if you were a customer of AT&T, you couldn't talk to a customer of Comcast and so on. And the internet kind of bridged all those together to the point where it doesn't matter who's your network provider. I think the long-term vision is that we would reach the same point with blockchains, right? Where your asset lives on some chain, doesn't matter what chain it's on, and you can interact with people on other chains, you can trade with them, you can use applications on other chains. We're not there yet, but hopefully we'll get there. So I think that's like the interoperability question is literally the internet question of the blockchains. So it's pretty interesting area. Okay, one last question, and then I'm going to open it up to comments. I promise. So to questions from the crowd. So yeah, I kind of, as we said, I like to think of 4 successful application areas for blockchains, right? Finance, NFTs, DAOs, and gaming. Yeah, 4 areas. I'm very curious, Ali, if you think what do you think is the best? And by the way, the reason I mention these 4 is because these 4 have been successful. Right. I mean, these are all very large industries at this point with many projects and doing quite well. So I'm very curious, like, do you want to speculate? Do you want to guess, like, what's going to be the 5th, 6th, 7th areas for blockchains?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is fascinating. There's lots that we can talk about. I mean, I think one thing to mention is that like NFTs will probably fray, right? NFTs as a category will probably will not remain as a single kind of unified category that we refer to as NFTs, because I think it makes sense to think of them that way now, because like the kind of the canonical use case, the most common use case for NFTs so far has been collectible art. But NFTs are so general that actually like the right way to think of NFTs, like an NFT is just like a digital right that is enforced by a blockchain and that has kind of programmatic sort of software enabled features. And it's kind of like a file format, right? In that it'd be kind of it'd be hard to say that like there's a category that you could invest in or that you could be excited about that revolves around MP3s, right? Or it revolves around like the file format is like an implementation detail for various different kinds of things that you can do with it, and it's a very general thing. So I suspect that kind of NFTs will emerge as like this general building block that enables a bunch of different categories. So already what we've begun to see is that now NFTs are being used in applications that are quite different from the kind of collectible kind of idea. Like for example, NFTs and music have an interesting kind of relationship. Like we recently invested in this company called Sound. It's Sound.xyz. They recently went live, and you could think they're kind of like SoundCloud. They look similar to SoundCloud, but they have this kind of additional thing, which is that in the same way that you could comment on the track on SoundCloud, if you guys remember, you could add like a comment at some point in the music that other people would see when like the music got to that point. You can do the same thing on Sound, but the ability to add a comment is itself an NFT, right? And so as an artist, you can sell like a limited number, say 100 NFTs associated with your piece of music that your super fans can buy in an auction to be able to add a comment to the track and be able to kind of leave their mark on the piece of music that you created, which is like the first interesting kind of novel use case, right, for an NFT in this kind of music context. But then also what happens after that, right? Like the fact that you now have 100 users who hold these NFTs, and maybe you have like, say, 1,000 or 10,000 users who hold NFTs throughout your entire portfolio of music. If you're an artist that has many tracks and each track has 100 NFTs, all of these people who kind of hold these NFTs are now your community. And because it's all software, these NFTs could be used for anything. They could be used to grant people access into an exclusive chat room that only NFT holders can access, or it can give them access into, actual real world physical backstage events, or it could make them like members of a DAO, and they could collectively vote on things. What new piece of music should this artist create? And there's this whole other way for a musician and for an artist, for a creative person to engage with their fans. And the sky is the limit, because it's all programmatic. You can come up with a million ideas for what to do with the NFT, and the kind of role that it plays in the network and in the kind of application is kind of unbounded, and kind of the design space is so rich. So that's kind of an example of like it's like still NFTs, but it's like music NFTs, right? And there will be other kinds of NFTs that people play with. It'll all kind of connect, right? Like gaming and NFTs are connected because the in-game items are NFTs. And the idea ultimately is that you can take an item within a game out of the game and you still own it. It's your NFT, and you can take it maybe into a different game once multiple games begin to agree on the standards for how to render that item. And it becomes this portable thing that's part of your kind of universal identity online. And that's like what people start to call the metaverse, right? Like the metaverse is kind of like the integration of all of these ideas, where you have NFTs, you've got games, the boundaries between games, the boundaries between digital environments begin to blur. It all becomes kind of like the internet, where you can just sort of flow. You can move in and out of digital experiences as a persistent kind of avatar with your persistent identity, and you take the things that you own with you. All of that kind of like makes all of these ideas blend together. So that's maybe one point I would make. I think maybe just to give you another one, I think it wasn't included in the 4 that you gave, Dan. I think decentralized social will be big. And I given the example of a decentralized Facebook or decentralized Twitter. I think it's very timely because of all of the deplatforming and because of the insane political kind of situation that we're in, and kind of left versus right and all of this, and big tech, like the backlash against big tech. And so I very much expect we'll start to see decentralized versions of Twitter or Facebook, of things like that, which kind of are trustworthy and are neutral and are more like kind of like public goods where users have control, but also maybe have new features, right? And allow you, I think, again, they will kind of interface with NFTs, they will interface with crypto more directly. They'll allow for new kinds of behavior. Like Mirror is already interesting. Mirror is kind of like Medium, but it's not Medium because it also lets you bootstrap a DAO within the context of a blog post, which is kind of mind-boggling. So anyway, maybe I'll stop there.
No, very, definitely very interesting. So lots of still opportunities for new applications. Okay, so I have a million more questions that I could ask, but I think I'm going to live up to my promise and let the audience actually ask some questions too. So we have a bunch of people who have raised their hands. So we'll just go in order. So Will, you're up first.
Absolutely. Well, Ali, thanks so much for joining us. So my question is about hypothesis testing. So say you have an idea and you want to understand if there is a need for your use case. How would you suggest going about assessing it in crypto versus Web 2? Specifically, is it interviews with crypto protocols, write a white paper and just put it out there and see how much engagement you get? Is it try and create like a mock-up? We'd love to get your take on this.
It's a great question. I think it may depend very much on the specifics, right? Maybe a little bit that it's case by case, but I think that usually biasing towards building the initial version or building an MVP, building something that's super simple, just as a proof of concept, is usually kind of like a very good direction to head in for various reasons. One of them is that it'll kind of like unearth some of the assumptions that you might be making and will kind of force you to confront reality. Like, for example, you may have some idea for like a financial thing that you might want to build, but turns out because of the limitations of Ethereum, because of gas costs, because of like solidity, because of all of these kind of like sort of specific things that are kind of incidental but real, that it's actually very hard. And maybe that's the reason that no one has ever kind of done it before. And this happens, for example, like a good example here is like options protocols. That's like the one missing primitive in DeFi, where you've got like lending, you've got like stable coins. People have started to build things like insurance. Options is still like derivatives on chain still don't exist. And the reason for it tends to be like a combination of the fact that you can't really do that much computation on chain. So you can't run something like the Black-Scholes model to price an option on chain. And so you have to rely on the kind of the assistance of some centralized off-chain kind of component, which kind of defeats the purpose. And so most of the options trading happens off-chain. And then the other one is kind of the fact that you don't have identity on chain. And so it's hard to trust anyone you might encounter in the crypto world. And so you have to assume that they're adversaries. So therefore everything has to be over collateralized. So options on chain tend to be very capital inefficient because the underwriters of those options have to provide a bunch of collateral up front. And these are kind of things that I think you would only find out either you talk to a bunch of people who have tried it, or you try it and you kind of encounter some of these issues. So I would say like those two things.
I'm specifically thinking about like relatively meaty pieces of Web3 infrastructure. So something like Akash, the Graph, Filecoin, where like it's quite hard to build a demo.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think empirically, the kind of the more fundamental pieces of the infrastructure in the space have taken quite a while to build, right? So like I remember like, you know, investing in some of the layer one protocols in 2018. It was just a hilarious thing because the kind of the launch date would continue to sort of continually recede, right? And there was this joke, it was 2018 and everyone said, we're going to launch Q1 of 2019. And then very, very quickly, that timeline eventually became Q1 2020, right? Like it all kind of shifted a year progressively. And we had this joke that it's always Q1 of the next year. Like that's kind of like what people always say. And it's because there are hard problems. And I honestly don't have a great answer for you. I mean, Dan I think also might have really good thoughts here. Where
actually, honestly, I think your first the thing to do is to actually write down your thoughts, write down your ideas in as much detail as you can. You know, by fleshing them out on paper, you'll run into a lot of the problems that Ali is talking about, right? And then if it's in fact viable and it's still a good idea after you've fleshed it out, then it's time to assemble a team and start building something. That's when you go talk to Ali and see if you can actually raise some funding for it.
That's right. Well, and I wonder, Dan, like how to balance like trying to write down like a specification and trying to reason about things sort of in a top-down kind of rigorous way versus just trying to write code. And I think it's an interesting balance where sometimes like, you kind of need a little bit of both. You do need maybe some kind of a sort of machinery, like sort of think about things rigorously, especially if it's truly very infrastructural, like in the case of like zero knowledge proofs or things like that. You probably do want like a rigorous argument for why something is going to work.
Well, there you need a proof. There, it's not just
proof.
Not a zero knowledge proof, a real proof.
A real proof, mathematical proof.
But by the way, I mean, one thing to remember is if something is very easy, it's very likely that you're going to have a lot of competitors by the time you launch. Whereas something is very complex and deep, then maybe by actually you writing it out and working out all the details, maybe you're going to be the only one that's actually able to pull it through.
Exactly.
So that's an important trade-off too. So we should move on. We have a lot of people, a lot of questions, and that
was a long answer. Sorry.
No, this is great. So Kaido, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan and Ali. So I have two questions. The first one is a little bit technical. The second one is a little bit more chill. So the first question is on ZK proof generation process. So for context, 10,000 transactions from DYDX executing on StarkX takes about 5 hours to generate the proof. And that is a long latency. So from the industry side, do you see any innovations, happening there? And the second question is a little bit more meme, which is how do you, what's happening with Mark and his Twitter account? And
oh boy.
On Twitter, about block.
Well, I'll actually let Dan answer the first question because he's a million times more qualified than I am. I'll give you my own take after then.
You can answer this. Sure, yeah. Kaido, we talked about this actually. So there's been enormous progress in zero knowledge provers, right? Like every day there's like new ideas.
Yeah.
In fact, the Mir guys just put out a pretty cool idea called Plunky 2 just the other day for recursive snarks. Yeah, so that speeds things up even more. So the fact that it takes 5 hours today, the thing to remember is A, these are often parallelizable computations, so we can throw more hardware at it. And B, the algorithms constantly improve, the actual underlying proving algorithms. So 5 hours today, probably in a year will be cut in half, if not by a factor of 10. So honestly, I mean, I think this is kind of where things are going, and I wouldn't be the 5 hour figure should not scare you off.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
But then did you mention hardware there? I kind of briefly.
I mentioned both the hardware parallelism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hardware parallelism and improved algorithms.
Yeah, exactly.
Both of those play a role. I'm going to leave you with the hard question of Mark.
Well, I mean, Mark is Mark. I mean, what am I supposed to say? He fully manifests his personality in the world. I love it. I don't know what else to say.
Is that related to Web3 or metaverse, projecting your personality into the world more?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely fully bought in. But it's been funny to see. Like, I think actually the Web2 backlash on all of this stuff is one of the best signs that this stuff is actually beginning to work, because it is terrifying to like the Web2 kind of incumbents. If none of this actually mattered, do you think that Jack would be like making a whole kind of fuss about this space on Twitter? So it's just a good sign. It's like the incumbents are now beginning to be afraid.
Thank you for the meme.
It's very, very interesting. So Brandon, you're up next. Brandon, you're able to.
Yes, thank you so much. Ali, the talk was great. So I saw you guys invested in Syndicate over the summer. And for people who don't know, it's sort of a platform that makes it very easy to create DAOs. And I was sort of curious on how you guys chose Syndicate as opposed to some of the other. I read your article online on sort of the investment case, and that made a lot of sense. I was curious sort of how you thought about the competitive landscape in terms of other platforms like Aragon or Tribute Labs or Colony. Like, why did you choose to back Syndicate instead of those?
For sure. Maybe actually this is a good time to cover that question, the initial question of how it is that we make investment decisions. And I'll give you just a very quick rundown. So there are various components. I think that the far and away the most important piece is the team. Right? So we build relationships with people, we get to know them, we build conviction on who they are and what their motivations are and their capabilities. And that's kind of the most important thing, especially early stage. That's what venture really is about. Like, there's this whole kind of misconception that it's all about kind of like some fancy theory of the future, but really ultimately it comes down to investing in good people. So that's the first. The second is, yes, the idea. What are they working on? What's the direction they're headed in? What's the competitive landscape? What are the risks? Will it work? Like, what has to happen? What do you have to believe for this to work? And how big could it be? Right. And once you kind of have some model for that, then you can ask questions around what's the value capture mechanism? What's the business model? If it works, how much should this be worth? How do I think about valuation? How do I think about the potential value of our investment? And so that's kind of the business model and value capture question. Then there's the kind of go-to-market strategy. How will this team drive the idea, the product, the protocol, and network to adoption? And there should be some story for how you do that, because it's not the case that if you build it, they will come. You actually have to do things to get people to come. So that's go-to-market. Then there's, if there are, depending on stage, sometimes there are metrics. If the thing's already live, if there's something already for us to look at, we'd like to see the numbers. How is it faring? How fast is it growing? It's an important piece. Understanding the competitive set is one as well. There's regulatory risk sometimes, so understanding the regulatory considerations around a project is another kind of important piece. And then finally, just the actual terms, like valuation and things like that. So that's kind of like a rough framework for how we think about things. And so as to why Syndicate versus some of the others. I mean, I think ultimately, like the team is incredible. Like the Syndicate team is amazing. If you guys haven't met them, Ian and Will, they are, I mean, both extremely smart, have been in the space for a while. They get it. They have the right motivations. They're in it for the right reasons, and they're in it for the long term. And so I think that's probably like the primary dimension. So I have fewer comments about some of the other projects, but I think Syndicate's it's a great one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good answer. Yeah, very complete. Perfect. Okay, Ipshita, you're up next.
Thank you, Ali and Dan. This was super helpful. Yeah, I had a question for you on your comment earlier about decentralized social. What do you think really sort of needs to happen in the ecosystem for decentralized social to be a reality? And the sort of reason underlying my question is that Steam had kind of tried it a couple of years ago, and then it was just like an adverse selection problem. And even today, I feel like that adverse selection problem hasn't really been solved. And the people who flock to those sort of networks are the people who kind of need their voice to not be. And so I think one is, how does one think about solving that problem? And the other is, how do you think about solving the on-ramp and infrastructure problem to actually get a meaningful number of people to participate in these networks?
It's a great question, and I think it gets at a lot of the open problems in the space, a lot of the missing pieces, because I think the things that need to happen for decentralized social networks to work are similar to like the things that need to happen for broadly the space to work and for the space to like reach billions of people. I think I mean, again, like I think the infrastructure needs to get better. We need better scalability. It's hard to imagine something like Twitter running fully on chain. So like there's this question, how much of it should be on chain? If a lot of it is off chain, you lose some of the benefits. So there's a question of like the right level of decentralization, how much should be on chain versus not. And that's still kind of an open question. Like how valuable is decentralization? Where does it really matter versus where doesn't it? Maybe the tweet itself or the post itself can be on a centralized data store, but the social graph should be decentralized, and maybe that's one way that you could do it. But you know, there's a lot of design space to explore. There's also the question of I think what you were getting at with Steemit is like the token model. Like what is the incentive structure that makes the social network work and that makes it have like the right sort of be like a profitable thing for the people who built the social network, and also for the community, for the people who own it, for the people who collectively participate. And that's still an open question. Like, how do you sort of create the right incentive structure for it to work? And that's kind of like a mechanism design question. There's, I think, the UX challenge. Like, you need kind of a good wallet. You need a good way to interact with the blockchain. All of these things need to get better, and they need to be more user friendly. We need like better product people to enter the space, to kind of come up with better ways of interacting with private keys and making that whole process more straightforward. So all of these things just kind of have to get better. And I think over time, I think they will. A lot of people working on each of these pieces. But yeah, maybe that gets at.
But I think actually we're not actually going to be recreating Web 2 on a blockchain. That probably is not where things are going. It's very likely that if social appears on a blockchain, it's going to be a different type of social. Yeah, and that hasn't been. We don't know what that is yet. Nobody's done it yet. Nobody's succeeded at least in doing it yet. Right. So I think it's important to remember the goal is not to recreate Web 2 on a blockchain. It's to do things in a way that's, you know, a good fit for what blockchain provides.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good kind of general lesson is that it is usually a good thing to build something that's uniquely enabled by kind of the new paradigm, right? Because if you're just trying to compete with the old paradigm, with the old thing, then you're competing against it in its own terms. So if you're just trying to build Facebook, well, why are you better than Facebook? If you're just marginally better than Facebook, why should people use your version instead of the Facebook? Whereas if your version has something that's kind of unique and completely impossible in the previous paradigm, then there's this compelling reason. If you want that thing, you got to switch. You got to kind of try the new thing.
And I think in the area of social, I'd say we don't yet know what this new thing is. It's really kind of up to a lot of experiments to show us what, you know, what is the new thing here.
Completely agree. I think, yeah, I might have to do with DAOs. Like Mirror is an interesting kind of example of interesting things that are going on, but it's so early. I do feel like, again, like there's just so much low hanging fruit, right? And so any one of you, I think, could probably come up with really interesting ideas for
I have to say, one could even argue that the Constitution DAO was kind of a social experiment in blockchain. Yeah, that's something that was kind of unique to blockchain, something that probably
completely unique. It's that 17,000 people who came together to raise $45 million in 5 days. Insane, like insane to do that without crypto and blockchains.
Yeah, great. Nick, you're up.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ali. This has been super helpful. I'd love to get your perspective on something that I've been struggling with a lot, which is the future of privacy and decentralized technology. So, I think if you kind of going back to your analogy, Ali, the original maybe believers in decentralized tech and the blockchain, the sort of cypherpunk sovereign individual community, or people that really cared about privacy and the ability to stop censorship. And I think if you look at what's happened with Bitcoin and with some of the blockchain analysis companies, it's becoming very, very hard to be private in certain protocols like Bitcoin. And if you kind of read between the lines with what I think the European and American regulators are talking about from a financial perspective, there's some signs, I think, that they're not so happy about the privacy-focused coins like Monero, for example. So I'm curious how you think about the importance of privacy to the Web3 ecosystem, and technological, both from a technological and regulatory perspective, how can we make privacy something that remains?
Yeah, also a fantastic question. Dan will also have lots of great thoughts. There are a couple of angles here. Like I think one of them is, why do we care about privacy? And there are multiple answers to that. One answer is because people care about having their personal data be private, which I think is an interesting angle to explore. I think a more interesting one is, or equally interesting at least, is what does privacy enable that you actually can't do without privacy? So that's more of a technological lens. Like, for example, we invested in this project called Alio, which is a layer 1 smart contract platform, but it's fully private. It's based on zero knowledge proofs on ZK snarks. And it allows for kind of the execution of a smart contract, everything that you kind of know and love about what you could do on Ethereum, but in a way that's fully private. And what's interesting about that is that it unlocks new kinds of applications that you couldn't possibly build on Ethereum by virtue of the fact that these smart contracts are private. And an example of this is, like, imagine trying to build a decentralized hedge fund where you have contributors that provide strategies for how to allocate capital, right? So you might have an idea about where to invest capital that you can contribute to the decentralized hedge fund in an encrypted way, right? And like essentially have this idea for investing, for allocation of capital you contribute, and then the smart contract can maybe take the capital from other people who contribute money to the smart contract to actually run that strategy. And then if it does well, if the strategy is profitable, then there's profit that gets distributed to both the people who contributed the money and the people who contributed the investment ideas. And it's something that you couldn't possibly do. You can conceivably do that with private smart contracts, but you couldn't possibly do that on Ethereum, even if Ethereum were scalable, because your idea would be completely visible to everyone, right? And so that's kind of an interesting angle for, like, privacy is interesting, not just because of all of the reasons that people care about privacy, but because it also actually gives you a whole other it unlocks a whole other region of the design space. As for regulation, it's not my kind of area of expertise. We have a whole team who kind of focuses and thinks about kind of the regulatory aspects of crypto. But I think, what we'll have to do is we'll have to educate regulators about what this technology is. And then we'll also have to sort of find middle grounds, right? Like, I think there will be ways of sort of de-anonymizing information in the space. And like, we'll have to kind of build those things into protocols so that they're not so offensive to governments that they just can never see the light of day. I think Dan actually has many more thoughts on that front than I do. So Dan, if you want to.
Yeah, actually, Ali, I think your last point is a really, really important one. So Nick, I think maybe we talked about this before too, but just to reiterate, if Stanford, for example, wanted to pay my salary in crypto, and if that was done using Bitcoin or Ethereum, everybody in the world today would just know everybody's salaries. So that's like a fundamental privacy here is kind of a fundamental requirement that without it, we simply can't use crypto, right? If we want to use crypto payments for supply chains, well, you can't have the whole world know what people are paying for parts of things they're building. So privacy is kind of an important issue. But I think what Ali said is kind of the killer point here, which is the question is, there's always tension between privacy and law enforcement. The question is, how do we provide privacy and at the same time prove that everything that we're doing is compliant with all the regulations that it needs to comply with? And whenever I say do things privately, but prove that they're compliant, we have the technology to do it. It's called a zero knowledge proof, right? So you put encryptions or commitments on the blockchain that reveal nothing about what you're doing, and then you prove in zero knowledge that you're compliant with the rules of the blockchain, with whatever regulations the regulators want to enforce. So the technology is here. We know how to build this stuff. Yeah, we just have to deploy it. And in fact, there are actually companies, there are a couple of startups actually in the space. And so, we just have to make sure that they're allowed to deploy what it is that they're building. And, that it's kind of an amazing thing that crypto zero knowledge techniques are able to kind of relieve the tension between the need for privacy and the need for compliance. We can have both, and it's not either or. So, you guys can all be ambassadors for this, because I don't think the public, or definitely the people who are policymakers, understand that this technology is really kind of something that's counterintuitive. How is it that you can prove that something is true without looking at what it is you're proving? But that's exactly what this is doing. We can prove statements without revealing what it is that's actually being proved. So I think there's a way out, and hopefully that actually is the thing that will get deployed. So thanks for asking this. This is a really, really, really important topic. So great, Griffin, you're up next.
Thank you. So I'll say the thing that has struck me the most while building software in the blockchain space so far has been the level of composability and the willingness amongst developers to build composable systems and to adopt standards quickly. Now, this sort of kind of happened in the beginning of Web 2.0 with open APIs, projects like Yahoo Pipes. My question to you is, do you envision this composability growing or continuing to be as composable as it is? And if so, why?
It's a good question. I think, one of the beautiful things about the space is the fact that things are open source, and it's part of like the cultural ethos of the space. And the fact that things are open source allows them to be composable, even just by virtue of the fact that people can reuse the code and sort of do something with it that may be like slightly different from its original use case, modify it, remix it, kind of recombine it. But then that combined with the fact that software that runs on a blockchain has certain guarantees, right? The fact that you can kind of encode into a program that runs on a blockchain a governance mechanism that ensures that it kind of always remains neutral, and that it's always kind of decentralized and kept aligned with the interests of a broad community is I think what helps. It helps people build confidence that building on top of that piece of software is something that could be a good idea. That you could bet your company on top of one of these building blocks, because you know that it's not going to change the rules on you in the way that Web 2.0 APIs often do, right? Like I think the issue with Web 2.0 composability was always that it's this notion of platform risk. The fact that if you build on top of Twitter, at some point, if you start to get very big and start to make a lot of money, Twitter might turn around and say like, well, hey, we want a piece of that, right? You're building on top of our APIs. We should get more of a cut, and they'll change the rules. And this happened countless times with just about every major Web 2.0 company. And there's countless of examples, like Tweety was building on top of Twitter. Zynga was building on top of Facebook. It goes back all the way to like people building on top of Microsoft Windows, right? And Windows, in a sense, have changing the rules, the platform rules for applications on top of it. So that's kind of been the issue forever, and it's the fact that the kind of the underlying platform is under the control of a single entity that has a profit motive. And in the context of a blockchain, when that's no longer the case, if the building block that you're building on top of is immutable and that it cannot change because it's hard-coded onto a blockchain, or maybe it can change, but it changes only through this well-established governance process that's democratic, then you can actually build the confidence to build on top of a building block, kind of sort of believing that it will continue to do its thing in the long term. And Ethereum is that, right? Like the fact that people are willing to like spend a material portion of their lives building something that depends entirely on Ethereum could only happen because Ethereum is decentralized and not controlled by say like a multi-trillion dollar big tech company that could just change the rules anytime. I hope, does that answer the question?
But actually, Ali, I think the composability is coming under somewhat of a threat in that the siloing of blockchains that we're seeing, you know, an application on Solana wants to call an application on Ethereum, or wants to call an application on Polkadot, or, you know, pick your favorite silo. These things are the bridges that we have today. They're slow. They're very expensive to use. Right. Well, I mean, we have all these examples where the bridges themselves are actually quite, you know, they're not that user friendly. So I think this composability actually is in some way is coming under threat, right? And so this vision that we need an internet of blockchains that's generic enough so that it doesn't matter where your asset lives, you can always interact with any other application. We're not there. Yeah, we're not there yet. And that's actually something that still needs to be built.
Totally. But I'm optimistic that I think we've seen recently, like at least 20 teams that are attacking this kind of a cross-chain interoperability problem. We've recently actually made an investment there that we haven't announced, so I won't say which one. But I feel kind of very optimistic that we'll figure out the interoperability problem. And I think that will then lead to, again, just a whole other wave of composable, the sort of cross-chain interoperability. And it would actually even expand the magnitude of network effects, because now you have the whole universe of multiple blockchains and all the applications that are built on top of those blockchains to interoperate with, as opposed to only the things that exist on the kind of the local blockchain.
Griffith, does that kind of answer your question, or were you looking at a different angle?
No, that answered my question. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah. So bright future, hopefully bright future ahead. Lingji, you're up next.
Oh, trying to unmute myself. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ali. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you.
So my question is about a couple of days ago, Cryptography, Moxie, write a blog regarding, you know, his arguing today a lot of so-called decentralized platforms are not decentralized. He gave an example regarding OpenSea. I'm not saying like we should not buy anything from OpenSea, but he gave a great example, like exactly same NFT, you view that based on different IP address of agent request. You can view that dramatically differently on OpenSea or your wallet. So you talked a little bit regarding one of the trilemmas that blockchain is facing regarding scalability. I'm just want to like talking about the other one, which is the decentralized one. My question is, did you think we still need better infrastructure to advocate decentralization, or we are good enough for that? Or you think the future is more like a mix of, you know, centralized part as well as like some decentralized platform?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I mean, I do think that Moxie actually identified real limitations of the space and real challenges that the space has to work towards, and that the space is working towards solving. I think I mean, there are a couple of things that need to happen in order for sort of the problems that Moxie addressed to be kind of solved. I think one of them is this problem of verification, is the fact that it's too expensive to run a full node on a mobile phone. And therefore you kind of have to rely on some third party to run a full node for you. And this is kind of like the thing that Moxie is saying, like people don't want to run servers. And so they always will hire someone else to run a server. And there's like scale effects to being the person who runs all the servers. So eventually you end up with one massive company that runs all the servers and you're back to square one, it's all centralized. But I think, like, for example, I think the magic of zero knowledge proofs is powerful, and I think over time will allow for more and more of the verification to be doable on a mobile phone. And it's a combination of like the algorithms getting better, like the sort of the kind of the verification of a proof can become very, very efficient. The generation of the proof becomes more efficient. The hardware gets better, right? Like mobile phones get better all the time and they get faster. And so I do think, like, given that the ethos of the space is very much towards decentralization, which is the key difference, right? Like the fact that people actually care about decentralization in this wave makes a difference, because in the previous waves, that was not top of mind, right? Like platform risk as a problem only kind of got discovered through experience. Like there were countless startups who were building companies on top of Web 2 APIs that ultimately got deplatformed. And now there's a very well understood playbook and a very well understood sort of set of problems that need to be addressed. Developers care about the infrastructure on top of which they build. Developers think about platform risk. Because, for example, like VCs like us, that's one of the first questions we would ask. We would not back a company that's solely dependent on Google's APIs, because we know that can't become a big company, given that Google has its own kind of agenda. And so given that that's like now common knowledge, the fact that developers will opt to build on top of building blocks that are decentralized, the fact that only protocols that are truly decentralized will likely get the funding that they need, all of that creates sort of a force towards decentralization and a force towards figuring out some of these issues. So I mean, I expect like over time people will come up with good ways of addressing some of these issues. I think the other thing is that all of this is open source, right? And so it's different from like kind of the traditional Web 2.0 world, because the fact that it's open source and the fact that it's on a blockchain gives you as a user and gives you as a developer much more optionality. It's easy to move over from one service provider to another, right? If the service provider becomes tyrannical, you still own your keys, you still own your assets on chain, and it's easy to just port over to like some non-tyrannical, some like more benevolent equivalent. Whereas in the Web 2.0 world, where companies just own all your data, and they own kind of the fundamental sort of pieces of the puzzle that lock you in, there's just no way you could exit. You can't like leave Twitter and take your followers. Like Twitter owns the social graph, so you want to be connected to those people, you just kind of have to be on Twitter. And so those are the key differences. I feel like that's what Moxie misses. He misses that there are fundamental differences about the space, and even though there are problems now, those problems are real. They will get sorted out just because of the fact that people are working on them. Very smart people are working on them. So that would be my take. Here's Dan. I think I would love your take too.
Oh yeah. So first of all, I think Moxie's write-up is really quite good. I would highly recommend that people read it.
Yes.
I think that we have very good answers to everything that he brings up, and it's kind of, unfortunate that we're bringing this up only five minutes before we have to end, because we could devote the whole hour just to discussing those points. Maybe one thing that I'll say is like, I think this is, Lingji, something you brought up, that basically, when you buy an NFT, really the NFT could kind of change under you, because the provider could change what data you're getting when you fetch the NFT. That's actually one of the issues that he brought up, right? That the NFT kind of looks different depending on who's viewing it. I think that that actually was a very annoying bug. I think it's a very annoying bug in the ERC 721 standard, honestly. Yep. So it's something we knew about, and Moxie kind of brought it up to the forefront. Is 721 just has a bug in it, in that the hash of the digital object should be in the on-chain, in the ERC 721 data store, right? Whereas right now, it's just called metadata in the ERC 721 standard, and people don't put the hashes in the on-chain actually. So he kind of brings to the forefront a bug that is something that should be fixed. And in fact, you guys should go out and write better ERCs that actually would be a better way to record NFTs. There's actually a number of other very, very good topics that are raised in that article. Like, for example, is alchemy like a centralized point for the whole blockchain, right? If we rely on alchemy as a centralized point, why do we need a blockchain? Why don't we just have everything recorded by alchemy and be done with it, right? And again, there are good answers to that. That's something that obviously needs to be solved. And yeah, like Ali says, it's just it takes time. So I believe that we'll get there. So let's see. So we're kind of running short on time. Maybe we can take one more question. Ali, are you okay with that?
Sure. One more question.
Yeah. So Jenna, you're up next.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I just had two follow-up questions. Feel free to just take one if you don't have time for both. But one was on the founder side. Obviously, you mentioned it was kind of the most important thing you think about when investing. So I'm curious, what do you look for on the founder side? And is that different from when you're investing in other sectors outside of crypto as opposed to kind of crypto-based startups? And then the second was just, you also talked about some of the kind of barriers to adoption. And I'm curious, what you're most excited about in terms of tools that are being built to solve those barriers.
Cool. Yeah. As for the first question, there are a bunch of things, but I think I'll mention just a couple. I think the most important things tend to be certainly the capabilities of the founders, and that can be established based on a deep conversation, doing a tech deep dive, really stress testing the ideas, getting a sense for how deeply they've thought about what it is that they're trying to build. Our friend Balaji has this notion of the idea maze, right? So every idea kind of resides within some kind of idea maze because there's a bunch of other variations of that same idea that people have tried. And it's always instructive to get a sense for how well a founder has explored the idea maze. And I think if you poke and you stress test an idea to kind of get a sense for how deeply they've thought about it, you kind of get a good sense for that aspect. So that's one. And then also their background, like sort of what they've done before, that kind of is instructive as to what their capabilities may be. Then the other one is, I think, motivations, right? Like why is this founder working on this idea? Like what is it that they're trying to accomplish? To what extent are they long-term oriented, which I think is a very important component. So gauging both of those, I think those are the two most important pieces. For your second question, I think, there's actually a big opportunity in the wallet category, where it feels like the wallet category might become what the browser wars were when we had Internet Explorer versus Firefox versus Safari versus Chrome eventually. And I think a similar dynamic might unfold. And I also think there is a lot of low-hanging fruit because there doesn't seem to be, only now do we see world-class product teams or product people wake up to the opportunity and enter the space. And I think the wallets that exist in the space now, they were built by the kind of the more crypto native crowd. And there are people who maybe have a different background. They kind of think more in terms of protocols. They think more in terms of sort of the kind of underlying systems pieces, and are not sort of the best product people in the world. So there's still an opportunity to actually build a wallet that is world-class from a product standpoint. We're very excited about Phantom as an example of a wallet that's really good, and we're investors. But it's by no means the kind of the categorical sort of winner, and there's just a lot of opportunity to kind of innovate at that level. Maybe that.
And there are more wallets coming, indeed.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jenna. So actually we're at time, but Ali, I cannot let you go before I ask two last questions. Yeah. So two quick questions. The first one is a very good question on the chat, which is what city or area do you consider the most vibrant in terms of blockchain activity? Like where should the students actually go?
I'm gonna have to say New York.
No, what? You're supposed to say
I know I'm supposed to say
New York.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay.
I do think it's New York now. It's kind of striking, in part because I think what's going on is that there's just no place in the world that has the intersection of tech and finance and culture that New York has. And I think because of COVID, people now can work from wherever they want. They just go to where they want to be. And turns out a lot of people want to be in New York. So there is this very large contingent of people here that are working in the space. And it's far more frequent, the case that we meet founders who are here. And now, actually, to be honest, it's rare to meet a founder who's based in San Francisco. So it's kind of striking. It happened very quickly, but I would say New York is probably the best hub at the moment.
Okay, guys, you heard this. This is a challenge to the Stanford community. We gotta take the mantle back. So
I agree.
Yeah, great. This is a challenge to us. Very, very good. And then the very last question is, the space is super duper active. There's like new things coming out every day. And maybe you'd be willing to share with the students, like, how do you get your news in the space? What do you follow? What's your source?
Oh man, that's a hard one. It's very hard because since it's so new, there aren't like any kind of like canonical resources. I mean, I think like obviously Stanford and like all of the stuff that Stanford puts out and other kind of, I think, good universities put out good research. Twitter, believe it or not, is like a huge source of kind of information, and it's like probably the place where a lot of the conversation happens. So you kind of have to be part of crypto Twitter. It's part of the space. And then there's like a whole long tail of like newsletters and podcasts and things like that, or individual people to follow, which are hard to enumerate. But you kind of, I think, over time start to get exposed to them and start following them.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good. Perfect. All right. Well, this has been super duper helpful, Ali. This is a really fantastic session. So thank you so much for coming. And thanks to all the students who stuck around and asked questions. Thank you all. And I think this is a wonderful way to launch the winter quarter accelerator. So thank you, Kun, for putting all of this together.
It's a real pleasure. Yeah. And you guys know where to find us. We're a16z.com. You can share if you guys want to share my contact info, feel free to reach out. And my email is alive@a16z.com. Really easy, as in I'm alive. So
perfect.
Great. If you reach out, if you have ideas, we're all ears.
Great. All right. Thank you all. And Ali, since you're in New York, you're probably gonna go to bed, so we'll let you go.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was a real pleasure.
Thank you a lot.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.